same Aztec king who ordered the hearts of 1,000 people ripped out would later stand at a dinner party and recite his own poetry. For the Aztecs, beauty and bloodshed lived side by side. The same culture that built flower gardens and opera houses also performed human sacrifice. A thick obsidian knife would break the ribs along the sternum, push the bone down, and pull the heart out, while the victim was still alive. Could entire lost civilizations still be hiding from us today? Civilizations we know absolutely nothing about. Recent discoveries have already rewritten history within one archaeologist's lifetime. Whole civilizations we had no idea existed, like Gobekli Tepe and the Amazonian earthworks. The Amazon jungle may be concealing an entire unknown civilization, one that built with materials that rot and vanish. Builders there used dirt, wood, and feathers instead of stone, so their cities have been swallowed by the forest, leaving almost no trace. Geometric earthwork mounds called geoglyphs hint at a buried society, huge patterns carved into the ground, visible only from above. Near the Andes, where the Amazon meets the mountains, stone architecture may still wait undiscovered underground, because that's where the rock finally pokes through. A river in the Amazon can rise over 100 feet every year, enough to swallow entire cities and bury them under mud and time. The same water that floods the Amazon every year carved the Grand Canyon from solid rock, using nothing but a tiny river and a lot of time. Which brings us to the most famous lost city of all, Atlantis. Did it ever actually exist? Most archaeologists think Plato invented Atlantis as a parable for his students, not as a real place, a teaching tool wrapped in a fascinating story. But if Atlantis had a real-world seed, archaeologists point to the Greek island of Santorini. Around 1600 BCE, its volcano erupted with unimaginable force. The explosion was so violent it blasted chunks of the city 70 miles away, embedding them in the cliffs of Crete. What survived of the city, buried in ash, is a place called Akrotiri. 3,500 years old, it had paved streets, plumbing, and even torch sconces on the walls. It's humbling to realize that entire civilizations, with all their dreams, wars, art, and politics, can vanish so completely that even their memory is lost. Modern nations like the United States are infants in historical terms. The city's flint studies in Central and South America lasted 800 to 1,000 years before falling to ruin. For the vast majority of human existence, we were nomadic. We moved in wide or tight circles, depending on the season, following food and shelter. Then, around 12,000 years ago, the last ice age ended. The climate shifted, the giant megafauna like mammoths died out, and the old way of life suddenly stopped working. When the megafauna vanished, it wasn't just a menu change. In the Americas, the loss of mammoths and bison left people relying on rabbits and small game, and that shift made gathering far more important than hunting. And here's the spark. Once people figured out how to stay put year-round, they stopped roaming. For the vast majority of human existence, we'd been nomadic, moving with the seasons. But settling down? That was the trigger that would eventually become civilization. But what actually drove them? Was it the stick, running out of food, the old way failing, or the carrot, some deep human urge to build, to explore, to impress the village? Archaeologist Ed Barnhart puts his money on the carrot. Humans have an explorer's heart, an innate desire to see what's over the horizon and to show off what we've achieved. The stick only comes out when things get ugly. Now, the really gangster story is how the first people reached the Americas. Imagine leaving Asia during the Ice Age, stepping into a world you know nothing about, not knowing what's ahead. The traditional theory says nomadic hunters simply followed the game across the Bering Land Bridge when it was dry land. They'd always followed migrating herds, and this time, the herds just kept going. But DNA has changed everything. When Barnhart was a young archaeologist, nobody dared go beyond 12,500 years ago. Now it's clear, people crossed at least 30,000 years ago. And some genetic evidence now hints at something that once seemed like madness. The very first migration might have happened as early as 60,000 years ago. That would rewrite everything. But that land bridge wasn't a one-way door. It opened and closed repeatedly during the Ice Age, as sea levels rose and fell. People didn't just walk across once, they came in waves. Once the bridge closed for good, the people already here became isolated. Their DNA mutated in unique ways, creating haplotypes found only in the Americas, proof that everyone came from Siberia, not Africa or Europe. The earliest Americans probably didn't crawl across the land bridge in a slow, steady trickle. It was more like a series of bold, sudden leaps. DNA analysis reveals a stunning fact. The oldest genetic lineages in the Americas are found not in the north, but deep in the Amazon. Some isolated groups there carry a signature that hasn't mixed with later waves of migrants for thousands of years. Here's the strange part. Multiple cradles of civilization sprouted up independently across the globe. Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, and the Americas. And yet, they all developed strikingly similar features: pyramids, writing, kings, calendars. Did these similarities come from a shared, deep ancestral past, a single culture that seeded them all? Or was it a case of parallel invention, where the human mind, facing similar problems, naturally arrived at the same solutions? The coast of Peru is a desert, but it hides a secret. Beneath the sand and scrub lie the remains of pyramid cities that date back to 3000 BCE, as old as the pyramids of Egypt. One of those cities is Caral, just north of modern Lima. It's one of the most important archaeological discoveries in the Americas, and yet, every time I visit, it feels like I've landed on the moon. There's almost nobody there, for miles, and Caral is just the tip of the iceberg. Peru's desert is vast, and it buries things completely. There are thousands of pyramids still out there, completely untouched, waiting to be found. Caral was actually discovered 100 years ago. But the early archaeologists, they called themselves antiquarians, took one look and walked away. No gold, no fancy pottery. They said, "This place is no good, we can't sell anything here." But then, in the 1970s, someone had a second thought. Wait a minute, no pottery, that means this place is older than the invention of pottery. We better go take another look. And that's when they realized, Caral wasn't just old, it was a full-blown civilization, thriving from roughly 3200 to 1800 BCE, a lost city, hiding in plain sight for centuries. The architects of Caral wove stone-filled baskets into the pyramid's core, so when earthquakes shook the coast, the whole structure just wiggled and held. Inside those same pyramids, archaeologists found tiny skeletons, human babies, buried in the fill. But Ed Barnhart doesn't think they were sacrifices. Infant mortality was brutally common in the ancient world. Many cultures didn't even name a child until it reached 5, because chances were it wouldn't. Huaca Prieta on the Peruvian coast is a different story. Its pyramid dates back to around 6000 BCE, thousands of years before Egypt's first pyramid. But the very first pyramid at Huaca Prieta might not have been built for glory. Ed Barnhart thinks it was just a way to cap a stinking, fishy trash pile. They dumped dirt and clay on top to seal the smell, and suddenly the trash heap became a dry, solid mound where people could gather and talk. Ed Barnhart's blunt answer for why pyramids appear everywhere: if you want a tall building without cement, you build a fat base and a skinny top. That's just physics. But once you've got a big mound, you realize it can do something deeper. It says to everyone who sees it, "We were here, and we built this to prove it." In North America, the process started differently. People ate so many river mussels and oysters that the shells piled up into mounds. Then they started burying their dead in them. That's how the Adena people in Ohio built their first pyramid, not from stone, but from dirt packed around generations of ancestors, turning a burial mound into a monument. But Caral was farming something unusual, not food, but cotton. They grew it by the ton, then wove it into fishing nets. Those nets went straight downriver to Aspero, a fishing town on the coast. Caral traded its nets for fish, and civilization grew from that exchange, not just from growing food. Religion in South America may have begun deep in the Amazon, not on the coast or the highlands. The earliest signs point inward, to the jungle. The Amazon holds the oldest pottery found anywhere in the Americas, fired clay, thousands of years before anyone else in the New World figured it out. Chavin's main temple sits exactly at the crossroads between the Amazon and the Pacific coast, about a 3-day walk from either side. The carvings inside that temple are unmistakable: jaguars, snakes, and crocodiles. None of those animals live on the coast. They all come from the Amazon. This temple marks the first religious iconography seen anywhere in the Andes, the very first clear, repeated images of gods and spirits. One single deity may have unified Andean religion across millennia, not a pantheon of many gods, but one central figure who kept showing up. This fanged god has goggle eyes, claws on his hands and feet, and snakes writhing from his head and belt. He likes to carry severed heads. He appears in Chavin, then Moche, then Nazca, then Wari, Tiwanaku, and finally the Inca, the same fanged face, across separate cultures, spanning 2,000 years. The Incas still worshipped him as their supreme creator, Viracocha, the same fanged deity who had crawled out of the Amazon millennia before. They gave him a new name, but kept the old traits: the goggle eyes, the snakes, the severed heads. Early scholars wrongly forced an Egyptian-style pantheon onto Andean art, labeling every creature a separate god, but the same fanged face kept appearing, on pottery, on temples, on textiles, wearing different animal masks, but always the same core identity. Hallucinogenic plants may have helped spark Andean religion itself. In the Amazon, shamans drank ayahuasca to enter the spirit world. On the coast, they chewed San Pedro cactus. Both opened a door to the same fanged deity. Stone carvings at Chavin de Huanta show priests inhaling ayahuasca through blowguns, mucus streaming down their faces. the same snot that appears on the transforming jaguar human figures on the temple wall. The drug opened the path to the gods. Nearly every hallucinogenic plant on Earth originated in the Americas: ayahuasca, peyote, San Pedro, morning glory, psilocybin mushrooms. The old world had almost nothing that could truly make you see another world. Maya priests instead reached trance through starvation and ritual blood loss. They cut their own penises and tongues, then burned the blood-soaked paper, breathing in the smoke to contact their ancestors. Could altered consciousness have been a real catalyst for civilization? In the Andes, hallucinogens were no sideshow. They were the engine behind the first religious ideas, the first art, the first shared stories that held communities together. Legends still speak of a lost Amazon city called Zed, a metropolis of gold and white stone hidden deep in the jungle. Explorers died searching for it. But the real city of Zed may have been built not of stone, but of earth and timber, and it was real. Huge mounds there connect through raised earthen causeways built for flooding. When the rainy season turned the forest into a lake, people walked dry-shod between neighborhoods. These were cities of the water, not of the dry land. New highways keep exposing more hidden Amazon earthworks every year. Loggers cut roads, and when the trees fall, the geometric patterns of ancient cities rise from the soil. Circles, squares, octagons carved by people who vanished centuries ago. Logging roads slice through the canopy, and where trees fall, ancient earthworks appear. But the very act of discovery destroys the fragile evidence, as the forest heals itself in decades, swallowing the past back into green silence. Deep in the jungle, patches of dark, enriched soil, called terra preta mark, where ancient Amazonians farmed intensively for centuries, so fertile that modern tribes still seek it out for their gardens. One researcher, Graham Hancock, argues that a single advanced civilization, now lost, secretly seeded all later cultures around the globe, from Egypt to the Maya. He believes that civilization was destroyed by a comet or climate cataclysm, and that survivors escaped to spread knowledge worldwide, a story as compelling as it is unproven. Most archaeologists flatly reject the idea of a single lost superpower. They see independent civilizations rising and falling on their own, each solving similar problems in similar ways. The bottom line, after decades of digging, no one has ever found a single potsherd or tool from that vanished global civilization, and archaeologists are very good at finding things. Deep in the Amazon, uncontacted tribes still live entirely outside the modern world, isolated for centuries, their existence known only from rare sightings and the occasional arrow. Among the Yanomami, violence is ritualized. A young man's rite of passage requires him to kill or maim someone from a neighboring village, a cycle of revenge that never ends. Illness was never seen as biological, it was a spiritual attack. If someone fell sick, the question was always, which rival village sent the curse? And the answer was often a raid. Civilized restraint, it turns out, is never permanent. It's a daily choice we make not to be savages, and history shows how quickly that choice can be forgotten. Around 1800 BCE, the first hints of what we'd call Maya culture appear on the Pacific coast where Guatemala meets Mexico, in a region called Soconusco. These early Maya were already trading with the Olmec to the north. In the swamps of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, the Olmec brought religion, while other regions brought ceramic technology, hematite mirrors, and obsidian tools. Mesoamerica as a cultural region runs from about halfway through the Chihuahua Desert in northern Mexico, all the way down only to halfway through Honduras. Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama are neither Mesoamerican nor South American, but a no-man's land in between. Here's the twist. The earliest Maya ceramics appear already technologically sophisticated, and down in Ecuador, potters had been making ceramics for 1,000 years before that, so many archaeologists suspect the idea of pottery itself traveled north from South America. In the Yucatan, deep inside a cave called Loltun, someone pressed their hand against the limestone wall and spat charcoal around it, a negative handprint, and we can date that charcoal to 10,000 years ago. Those hands are all small, smaller than a typical northern European hand today, so either a bunch of kids were crawling around that cave 10 millennia ago, or the people of Maya stature have been living there since the very beginning. Here's a puzzle that still baffles epigraphers. The ancient Maya writing system was apparently one single system, used from the top of the Yucatan down into Guatemala and El Salvador, but today, 33 mutually unintelligible Maya languages are spoken across that same area. It's a bit like Chinese characters, a single written script that can be read aloud in Mandarin, Cantonese, or Japanese and still understood, even though the spoken words sound nothing alike. In the 1560s, a Spanish priest named Diego de Landa sat down with a Maya informant and asked him to write down the sounds of his language. The informant, thinking in syllables rather than letters, wrote a list of consonant-vowel pairs that became the Rosetta Stone for cracking the code. For decades after, American and European scholars insisted the written language was a dead language, completely unconnected to anything spoken today, until a Russian scholar named Yuri Knorosov, who hadn't absorbed that assumption, simply went to the modern Yucatec dictionaries and started matching sounds to symbols. A Soviet linguist named Yuri Knorosov cracked the code using the words for dog and turkey. Yuri Knorosov's breakthrough finally unlocked centuries of Maya inscriptions. Rongorongo script from Easter Island still resists full decipherment. The ancient Indus Valley script remains completely unbroken today. Inca Quipu recorded history and math using knotted colored strings. Spanish priests burned Quipu archives and executed those who could read them. Roughly 1,000 Quipu survive, still waiting to be fully cracked. The Maya sacred calendar counted only 260 days. That count nearly mirrors the length of human pregnancy exactly. A second calendar, the Hab, simply tracked the standard solar year. The Hab, the Maya solar calendar, drifted a quarter day every year because they never added a leap day. Their long count calendar used base 20 math to track enormous cycles of time, not just years. That long count marks August 11th, 3114 BCE, as the start date of the current creation. 13 of its backtoon cycles later land exactly on December 21st, 2012. But no surviving Maya text ever predicted the world would end that day. In fact, some inscriptions describe dates far beyond that supposed apocalypse, like the year 4772. For the Maya, time didn't end. It simply renewed itself, cycling into the next era. Maya kings claimed magical blood that let them speak directly to the gods through their ancestors. That age of kings lasted about 400 years. Then the cities suddenly emptied. Even the rich were starving. Their teeth show lines from seasonal famine right before the collapse. The Aztecs told their own origin story, claiming they came from a distant, mythical homeland far to the north called Aztlan. They arrived in the Valley of Mexico late, around 1300 AD, as the last of the Nahuatl-speaking tribes. With no land of their own, they first worked as mercenaries for the established city-states around Lake Texcoco. According to their legend, their war god Huitzilopochtli told them to build their city where they saw an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a snake. They found that sign on a swampy, uninhabited island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. That island became Tenochtitlan. In just a single century, the Aztecs transformed it from a mosquito-infested marsh into a dazzling island city of canals, causeways, and towering pyramids, home to over 200,000 people. Aztec expansion was methodical. A special class of merchant spies, the Pochteca, would travel into unknown territories, trading goods while secretly mapping the land and assessing the military strength of potential targets. The Aztec army rarely had to fight. Their reputation for brutality was so fierce that most towns simply surrendered, agreeing to pay tribute in gold, feathers, food, and slaves, rather than face annihilation. They needed a constant supply of captives for sacrifice, so they deliberately kept one enemy alive, the Tlaxcalans. Every year, the two sides would fight a ritualized flower war, purely to capture victims for the temples. At the top of the pyramid, the priest would bend the victim over a stone. Using a thick obsidian knife, he would slice open the abdomen, break the ribs along the sternum, and tear the still-beating heart out with his bare hands. A terrible drought once threatened the Valley of Mexico. The Aztecs concluded their gods were angry because they hadn't sacrificed enough people. They dramatically increased the number of victims, and when the rains finally returned, it seemed to confirm their bloody logic. The bodies of the sacrificed were often butchered and eaten. The Spanish chronicler Sahagún recorded a specific distribution. The thighs and buttocks were considered the choicest cuts, reserved for the emperor and the highest nobles. Cortés didn't conquer the Aztecs alone. He walked into Tenochtitlan with 20,000 furious Tlaxcalan allies who had every reason to hate their Aztec overlords. The Inca took a very different approach to expansion. Instead of destroying their enemies, they absorbed them, turning conquered rivals into willing members of the empire. Joining the empire came with real perks. Every conquered town got new roads, grain storage silos, and a guarantee that no one in that community would ever starve. There was one catch. The moment a community joined the Inca Empire, every single llama in the village became the personal property of the Inca king. The Inca built walls so precisely that you cannot slide a razor blade between the stones. The blocks fit together like a giant three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. Some archaeologists believe the Inca didn't just carve those stones, they melted them together using a powerful acid, fusing the blocks like glass. Far to the north, in the bayous of northern Louisiana, a pyramid rises from the swamp. It is 3,500 years old, the same age as the pyramids of Egypt. Cahokia, just east of modern St. Louis, was the largest city in North America before European contact. At its peak, 20,000 people lived there. Cahokia was not alone. Hundreds of similar mound-builder cities stretched from the Mississippi River all the way to the Atlantic coast. These were not a single unified empire. They were rival kingdoms, each with its own king, its own territory, and its own wars. Hernando de Soto waded ashore in Florida with 600 armored men, horses, and war dogs. For the next 3 years, he marched his army through city after city across the modern Southeast, from the Carolinas to Alabama, then over to Louisiana. He was the first European to see the Mississippi River, but he saw it from a canoe paddled by enslaved native guides. De Soto was a brutal man. He had people burned at the stake, his dogs ripped others apart, and he ruled through pure terror. He made promises and broke them constantly. Wherever he marched, he stole stored corn, spread disease, and left destruction. By the time he died on the banks of the Mississippi in 1542, he had helped shatter the Mississippian civilization he had come to conquer. Christopher Columbus's voyages triggered what historians call the Columbian Exchange, a massive two-way transfer of crops, animals, and diseases between the Old World and the New. Europe got potatoes, tomatoes, maize, and chocolate, foods that revolutionized its diet. The Americas got horses, cattle, pigs, and goats, but also 13 infectious diseases that had never been seen there before: smallpox, measles, influenza, typhus, bubonic plague. 13 distinct infectious diseases arrived in the Americas within decades of first contact. Native populations had zero immunity. Entire villages caught multiple lethal diseases at once. People died so fast that there were often not enough healthy survivors to bury the dead. The death toll is almost incomprehensible. Current estimates suggest that in the first 50 years after contact, roughly 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas died, somewhere around 135 million people. It was the single greatest demographic catastrophe in human history. Disease did not discriminate by age, but it hit the old and the young hardest. Elders, the knowledge keepers who held oral histories, medicinal plant lore, and ritual traditions, were among the first to go. Children, the next generation who would have learned those traditions, died before they could be taught. Entire lineages of expertise vanished in a single season. In the span of a single generation, the Americas lost the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years. The knowledge of how to build pyramids, how to read the stars, how to weave the quipu, how to perform the rituals that kept the cosmos in balance, all of it blinked out. The survivors were so traumatized and depopulated that they could not pass on what they had learned. But the Spanish were not the first Europeans to reach the Americas. Around the year 1000 CE, nearly 500 years before Columbus, Norse Vikings led by Leif Erikson sailed from Greenland and established a settlement at Land's Oak Meadows on the northern tip of Newfoundland. They called the land Vinland. The Norse tried to settle, but they found the local people, likely ancestors of the Beothuk or Dorset, were not impressed. Every day, indigenous warriors attacked the Viking camp. They shot arrows, threw spears, and ambushed patrols. The Norse, used to raiding undefended Irish monasteries, had never faced such fierce resistance. The Vikings eventually gave up. Leif Erikson's own brother, Thorvald, was killed in a skirmish with indigenous warriors, shot by an arrow. The Norse abandoned Vinland after only a few years. They left behind only a handful of iron nails and the ruins of a few turf houses. The lesson was clear. The Americas were not going to be an easy conquest. So could ancient astronauts have actually built these lost civilizations? It's a popular idea, but the archaeological record offers no support for it. No real archaeological evidence supports any ancient alien visitation. Not a single tool, structure, or biological trace points to extraterrestrial contact. Beings capable of crossing the galaxy wouldn't travel light years just to show humans how to stack rocks. They'd have given us something more useful, like antibiotics or fusion power. Future archaeologists might misread our own monuments just as badly. Imagine them thinking Washington, D.C. was built by Egyptians because of all the obelisks. When a biological system changes this fast, it's usually a crisis. Technology's curve is going vertical, and that's both thrilling and terrifying. History moves in cycles. Empires rise, fall, and something new sprouts from the ruins. Humanity always climbs back up. Crisis, again and again, has sparked human innovation. Necessity is the mother of invention, and we're never more clever than when our backs are against the wall. One dedicated scholar still hopes to rewrite America's forgotten history books, to teach every kid that great civilizations thrived here long before 1492. Subscribe now, because the story only gets stranger from here. There are more lost cities, more mysteries, and more forgotten wisdom waiting to be unearthed. The same species that built empires can also recite quiet poetry. Beauty and blood, side by side. That's the human story, and it's still being written.